Okay. Should I roll it up a little bit more?
So you're taping the whole thing then?
What?
Are you taping the whole thing today?
Yeah. I promise this.
So we're going to start the afternoon session. This is only going to be about an hour. I'm going to talk for a few minutes, then we're going to do a quick beekeeper panel discussion. I'm going to bring up a couple other beekeepers, and the floor will be open for everybody to just ask questions. And I named it in the program, what's working for you and your bees. And so it's an opportunity for you guys to ask questions, and then one of us three or all of us will kind of answer based on what has worked for us and our bees, and maybe it hasn't worked. Your question may not even, we may be struggling with that too. So it's just going to be a good opportunity for us to all share information, and hopefully you get a chance to ask some questions that maybe you've had. Okay? With that being said, I want to start the afternoon off with a statement that's going to alarm some of you, but I'll go into great detail. Bees like to die. Okay, you're all like, yeah, right. Okay, especially, I sell bees, so I'm going to be pushing that. Before I even got into the business of selling bees, I was born into a business that sold bees, so bees like to die then when I had nothing to do with it. When I moved to Iowa in 2002 to go to school, and then when I moved back there to live in 2005, 2005. I met a beekeeper who ended up being my neighbor who ran 300 colonies, and he overwintered in 1.5-story configuration. Okay, and most years he would lose, he'd say around 20%, 25%. He'd make a good honey crop, plan on replacing his losses with his splits, but every few years he'd have a big loss. Okay, and then that's when he'd have to buy bees. And that's where a lot of sideliners are, guys that run 100, 200, 300. You usually can have enough to overwinter to make up your losses, or you have to maybe supplement those losses with buying bees. But his favorite phrase, he taught a bee class over there, and my son started going with me. We would go and speak at his class. He would always tell his new students, bees like to die. They'd ask a question, why? He'd go, bees just like to die. And he had been keeping bees his whole life in Iowa, even before Varroa. And so that was his tagline. And I was talking to somebody earlier, right before lunch, and they said that they had heard one of our, I guess you could say, better researchers here in the country use that same line. And it may be hard to swallow, but sometimes that's the reality of it. They are a domesticated livestock, in a sense. They're a managed livestock. And I like to tell people that you hear about, well, let's move towards sustainable beekeeping. Beekeeping is sustainable right now because commercial guys are out there raising bees in places where they don't have the compounded winter losses that we have. We're in a tough spot. We're in the Midwest, okay? 3 weeks ago, 2.5 weeks ago, it was like -28, -30. 2 days later, I was teaching a bee class. There were bees flying. 48 hours later. That's the kind of stuff that when that's going on during the winter, it's really hard on a cluster trying to thermoregulate and maintain its food reserves and start brood rearing. Because when a colony starts to brood rear with longer daylight length, they have a choice to make. Okay? Do we expand our brood nest? And if so, we have to do it around our food. Well, what happens when you get a 45-degree day and bees want to go on a cleansing flight, cluster breaks, and then less than 24 hours later, we're back into the single digits and sub-zero temperatures that we're going to have? I mean, that's hard. Now this cluster has to try to stay on 4 frames rather than 2, and bees start dying. Okay, they can't do as well. Sometimes you have to get in there and manipulate, move some frames of honey around. Because how many of you have had colonies that they started brooding up and they starved, but the food was 3 or 4 frames away horizontal? Well, that happens. Okay, and us as managers, you got to take advantage of breaks in the weather, or even, I tell people, don't go by any laws about when you can open the lid of a hive and move a frame of honey around. You have to go by laws when you take frames of brood and bees out and set them out to get chilled. But if if you open a top and you see a cluster that's, you know, on brood and using its last available honey, and there's frames of honey to the left and right, but several frames away, what's your best management strategy right then and there? Take your hive tool, take those frames of honey, and get them at least right next to the cluster. Okay? Or quickly move a frame that's got a cluster on it, break the cluster a little and drop a frame of honey in there and shut that hive back up. Okay? In addition to putting dry sugar, granular sugar, sugar blocks, fondant, all that stuff on there, that's something you can do. So keep that in mind. Don't sit back helpless, because you can be life-saving to your bees right now. There's going to be a lot of bees that die between now and April 1st. Okay? Even the ones that have made it through all this rough stuff, because now their brood rearing and food reserves are getting much lower. Keep that in mind. I also want to make this point before we start the discussion. If you're a hobbyist, and most of you are, you suffer oftentimes big losses. You lose 3 hives, that's all 3 of them. Or you only had 4 and you lost 3 of them. That's big, okay? You're not alone in this. Even commercial beekeepers lose bees. I could name for you, this year's been bad, okay? In California, and I know even a couple down south that have lost 2,000 and 3,000 colonies in their operation. Now that sounds like a lot, and it is a lot. Some of those guys only run 4,000, some of them run 7,000, some of them run 15,000 colonies. So to lose 2, 4, 6,000 colonies is quite an impact, okay? Because it means now they're having to rebuild, right? And that is a reality for some beekeepers that have not had to do that for a long time. And it's not because they're poor beekeepers, okay? It's because they've had to battle some things. In California, they were battling wildfires and air quality in late summer. Some of them couldn't bring their bees back as early as they normally do out of the Dakotas. So then they had to change their mite treatment schedules a little bit, because now they weren't treating them there, they were treating them there. And a week or 2 makes a huge difference. It makes a huge difference in your 1 or 2 hives, and it makes an exponentially huge difference when you're running 10,000 hives, right? So just think about that. So these guys too, the commercial guys, they're facing challenges, and you're not alone. And they're looking for answers too. So keep that in mind. With that being said, I'm going to call up Kent Begorsh and then John Adams, and I'm going to let Kent and John tell you a little bit about themselves in a second. I'll tell you a little bit about myself, and we're going to take some questions and answer them. I grew up in a commercial queen package operation down in Georgia, okay? So we didn't have these kind of winters. I've been keeping bees now in the Midwest, about 12 years in Iowa, and the last 2-3 years here in Wisconsin, in these kind of winters. So I've learned things that I never had to know growing up down there. I send most of my bees out to California for pollination, or else I sell them in the fall to guys that need to make up from normal summer attrition. These guys that lose 400 or 500 out of 10,000, well, they have contracts in the almonds for 10,000 hives. So they have to come up with those hives, and they can't make splits in November, so they'll buy them. So a lot of times I'll sell semi-loads of bees back to them to make up their losses. Then I don't have to manage them, and they got it. And then I'll buy again in the spring. So I manage those, and then I send a lot of the bees during the honey season to different guys who are running them on shares with me. They do the work, they're running them on their locations, and I'll manage the queens and the logistics of treatment and that kind of stuff through the honey season, then we split the crop. So I always have anywhere from 20 to 50 hives in the backyard, depending on the year, that I'll raise some queens in, make a little bit of honey for the family out of. So I just wanted to give you kind of my background. I grew up in a 7,000 hive operation, queens and packages, honey. We ran about 20,000 nukes for raising queens, and we dedicated maybe 600 of all those hives to honey production every year. That was it. It was mainly producing bees and queens. And then now I keep bees in the Midwest, send them to the West, sell them, make some honey, make some queens, do those kind of things. So that's my story. Kent, tell them about yourself.
I'm from Wapaka. This is my 43rd year keeping bees. I heard about 200 colonies. I think it's going to be a little business model for myself, because I like to keep bees. And my wife and I have a store, a gift store in Wapaka. It's about a 5,000 square foot gift store in an old historic building. There's 4 storefronts. One's kind of dedicated to honey and beekeeping education. So I sell almost all my honey through our store, which is kind of cool because the store is staffed 7 days a week. So I always have people there selling the honey for me, and I get to be out keeping my bees and making honey.
Hi, I'm John Adams. Not quite as large as these guys. Currently, I checked on them in January. I had about 80 hives live. We do sell all of our honey. We make products from the honey, and so been doing it. I'm 4th generation, learned from my grandfather. So been in the family a little while.
And you're located where, John?
We're about 30 miles east, a little bit north and east of La Crosse.
Okay. So, with that being said, knowing a little bit about us, and you have a question, start raising your hand.
Yeah.
Jim,
Do you treat your packages?
I do. Within the first week of putting them in, I do oxalic acid vaporization on them. Just one. That first week before the brood gets capped, just to kind of check the mite population, just in case the mite mites on.
What do you get? Do you get it out of my truck or no?
I don't even monitor the mite count. I just hit it with the oxalic and cross my fingers.
What's yours?
Yeah, mites are a problem, so we do treat with them. also.
Treat your package?
Yeah, I don't sell packages necessarily. We pretty much just restock our own. But I do sell for another gentleman that does definitely treat them.
Does any of you 3 guys treat them with oxytetracycline on installation of the package?
treat with,
Oxytetracycline.
I don't use terramycin unless I see a problem. I don't prophylactically or proactively use terramycin, only if needed.
Can I come in one? The old night, 3-4 years ago, I had packages, they had the high light on them. You can take them out, the package was clean. And they had parasitic mites and to treat them early and make them come back.
Okay.
For most of my career, I did use antibiotics every spring, just every spring, 3 times spring, 3 times fall. Last 10 years, I haven't. I've been struggling with it because I have known some beekeepers in my area. It might be kind of what you're referring to, is that when the bees are under stress in May, we get a little bit of drop off in the food supply. We see European foulbrood flare up. So if you wait for it to flare up, sometimes you're too late, and you just lose pressure from that time. I'm not doing it, but I'm really thinking about doing it. I don't like the idea of doing it, but I'm really scared of. I've seen it happen to some guys around me in a bad way where they lost all their production off some guards. So.
European foulbrood is 7 days. If you go over by June, you wouldn't have that same mites on it, so you continue.
So I'm going to clear this up for the audience. So you got European foulbrood. Are you familiar with that? It's a stress condition, typically that's self-limiting. However, there's some strains and variations of it now, combined with all the other viruses and things that the bees have, that sometimes it's not as self-limiting as it used to be. Parasitic mite syndrome, as Anna was showing you slides of it, looks very similar to symptoms of European foulbrood. And so a lot of times it's misdiagnosed because it's happening. Typically, European foulbrood is going to be a springtime condition, that once the weather and the nectar flow and the bees really start getting great momentum, consistent momentum, it is self-limiting. So just be aware of what we're talking about. We don't want to leave anybody in the dust here. And terramycin is typically used for the European foulbrood and can help with some of the foulbrood or brood issues that is showing up in like a varroa stressed colony. But if it's if you still got a huge varroa, if you're not doing anything about the varroa load, you're not going to be making any ground with terramycin. Okay, if you're controlling your varroa, but you've got a European foulbrood problem or something else where you might need terramycin, one treatment's not going to fix the other problem. So you got to be good at identifying what exactly it might be.
It's the thing, you said that the European colony is for spring.
Typically.
What's the timing of the event?
That's typically when they've had a varroa load that's causing stress. So usually they don't overlap, but they will in overwintered colonies that typically the mite population is lower, okay, coming out of winter, going into early spring, so it takes a little while before the mite population gets back up to a point that you're going to start seeing full-blown PMS, that's the parasitic mite syndrome, to mimic European. So if you're seeing what looks like European foul brood in, say, June, July, that's probably what it is. Get a mite count, and it might even be too late at that point. You may have had some colonies that were a little heavy on the mites, and they're already suffering. Oftentimes, you'll see the PMS later in the season, like August, September, or even late July. But if you're seeing it earlier and you're just assuming it's European, but the weather conditions and the nectar flow typically would say that, yeah, European shouldn't be a problem right now, you better look and see what your mite counts are. Because they can be very mimicking of one another.
In that earlier situation, about the June, July, probably more prevalent than overwinter.
Yeah, if it truly is PMS, because packages, even if your packages have mites, they're mites that are traveling with the bees. You don't have them established in the brood yet, and it takes a couple of months then of the mite's life cycle to get to where they're going to really trigger and show parasitic mite syndrome.
And I suggest something, if people go home on their computer and look up pictures, they'll see the mites in pictures of European colony, you see there's a difference.
Yeah, so he's telling you to look at the pictures of PMS and European. Yes, there's a difference, but they are very close to one another. To the untrained hobbyist, that's why I'm telling them to make sure. Yep.
There is actually a test, looks like a pregnancy test, but there is a test that you can use for European foul brood.
Be careful with it.
Okay.
A lot of false positives
Yeah.
and false negatives. Yeah,
That's what I was gonna
especially
ask
the
is
European and the American
how-
foul brood. That's
You don't think they're as accurate as they
No.
need to be? Okay.
One thing about that European development flare up in the springtime, and I really hesitant to use antibiotic, but the alternative to that, which is probably a better alternative, is if you know when your bees are under stress in May, if they drop off, when nectar and pollen coming in, put some pollen sub on, put some feed on, don't hesitate, don't wait a week, just do it right away if you know what's going to happen, because then you can get by that stress period for a minute, your problem will flare up.
John, you guys are up near La Crosse. Yeah, changing weather in the spring. Bees are building up, all of a sudden you get a week, it's going to put them under stress. You guys
We
do
see
the
the
supplementation.
same thing, a lot of it is mite driven, My grandpa never had that, or it didn't seem like he had that much trouble with them. As far as, once they came out in May, damn mites were out, seems like they would transition over May to June pretty good. These days, it seems like they all struggle in that May to June. They have nice drop, before you start getting fast with that on, that all kind of issue. And I would suggest, to the hobbyist, if you don't know what you're looking for, call your bee inspector. He's there for you guys. Doesn't cost you. Or he can work.
Yeah, or call that person in your bee club who you know has more experience. It's going to be hard to get the bee inspector in all cases to come out right away. The problem may be gone or totally different, but that's why it's important to network with other beekeepers so somebody with a better trained eye can give you some advice.
Take pictures of your cell phone, take a picture of it, send it to them, it's fast. Sometimes they can tell by just looking at the pictures, if not, you gotta get somebody to really help you.
Yeah.
We're seeing any increase in the small hive beetle infestations around the state?
Small hive beetles in every state. I don't know about Alaska, but it's in every state. When I moved to Iowa in 1998 to go to school, summer of '98, I visited a beekeeper on the Iowa-Minnesota border. You would all know him if I said his name. He said he'd been seeing small hive beetle for 6-7 years. Okay. Was it a problem? No, but he'd been seeing them. And this was when it was really just getting out in the publications that you can be looking for. Growing up in Georgia, we first started seeing them. It was about 94 when I was a senior in high school when we really started seeing them. But now, I mean, they're everywhere with migratory beekeeping and a lot in Illinois. We get a lot more reports out of Illinois, something to do with just I think the thermal line of temperature and soil types. You'll see yards that have them more because it's a sandier soil that they can run their life cycle into. Other places where they don't ever, you might see a few, but they never take hold, so to speak. So I've seen them both in Iowa, I've seen them here. What about you guys?
I move my bees around. I don't keep them in the same place from year to year. I might move them 50, 100 feet. I think it helps them a lot.
It does help because they have to hit the ground.
They're in the ground. So you move them. You ain't got to move them far, but just move them a little ways. And I guess we had 1 or 2 hives last year that ended up with bees. We put some traps in them. And my son was watching them. I asked him, he said, "Oh, I haven't seen any." So then we caught them in the traps. They're inexpensive, the traps. We think we might have them.
I've never had a problem in central Wisconsin, unless the hive is under, it's bad hive, crash hive, then I'll see small hive beetles in it. I've seen them in the wintering in the hives alive up here. When you have a large migratory guy from Florida who comes into our area and comes see hives, they're all over the place, but it's never really a problem. I never bring brood into my honey house if I can help it anymore, and I extract my honey right away. The biggest problem I worry about is if I had brood in my honey house and the honey sits there for a week, that could really be a problem.
So if you're trying to think as a hobbyist, what do I do about small hive beetles? Start with this. What do you do for waxworm? Keep your colonies that are out in the field healthy and alive and thriving. Don't let them dwindle or die out in the field, because if they do, they're going to attract small hive beetles. They want to go to the pollen and the brood comb, just like wax moth, okay? Most of the time they're an opportunistic pest, okay? It uses the beehive as one part of their life cycle because they don't have bananas and tropical fruits to jump on. They go to the honey and things like that. But at times we're hearing more and more about people saying, well, I've got a strong, healthy hive that maybe beetles got into some hives next to them that were suffering, and now the beetles jump into this strong, healthy hive, and it'll cause them to abscond, okay? Very, very rare, but it can happen. It's usually a problem where the hive is already dwindling, weaker, and the hive beetles take opportunity to have a residence, okay? And like Kent was saying, you want to keep them out of your honey house, okay? Because if you take your honey off and you stack it, and you're going to wait a week or so to extract it when you got it all there, if you've got hive beetles in your operation that have laid eggs in those supers, and you've got warm, humid conditions where you're storing those supers, that's tropical, guess what happens? You get an egg that hatches into a larva, which looks like a maggot, and they love to make a mess. And you aren't just picking 1 or 2 out, you're picking a bunch out. So I recommend to people, growing up where they were, we would have air-conditioned, conditioned rooms to bring honey supers into, not warm, muggy rooms, okay? So that you're not allowing those eggs to hatch into a larva. You're taking away the tropical conditions. Keeping brood out of the honey house, okay? Because again, they're attracted to the pollen, things in a brood frame. Just all those little steps of being careful helps.
What do you do after a hive gets slimed?
It's a mess. I mean, it's no different than if a hive gets eaten up with wax moth. It's pretty much scrape it down and new foundation, or wash it down, or start over. Yeah.
Toss it in the burn pile.
They don't do quite the damage that wax moths do in terms to the wood and all, but it makes a slimy, foamy, fermented mess. It's meat that's not potable or edible or whatever. It's bad. Yeah. Any of you ever had a hive that got slime? Yeah.
And Andy does it.
So it can make a mess. Oh, absolutely. Carl has a good point. If you try to salvage that honey and say, hey, I know they got in there, but I don't want to throw that away, you don't add bad to good, okay? Who do you give that money to? Who's spending any of my bee classes?
Mother-in-law.
Give that to your mother-in-law. Thank you. Next question. Yeah.
Screen bottom boards versus solid bottom boards.
I run screen bottom. I run about a 4-inch squares on each side. I run a lot of roofing hives though. We're sliding together. So there's actually 4 ventilators in there. Then I have top entrance. So I feel it. I can literally control that way. And it's going in the bottom. That's what I do. I think they're great. Even right now, they're open. They can help take moisture out.
I think they're a good idea. I run on pallets and on solid bonds, but they're definitely a good idea.
Mine are still I just roll them up the street.
I have used them on a small scale, maybe 10 hives with others, but I don't use them across the board. I don't like them in the early spring because it limits your brood nest growth, because you've got draft coming up and the bees have to thermoregulate that brood nest. At night when it's cold and they're expanding the brood nest, they have to be able to cover that developing brood. If they can't, they're not going to keep expanding the brood nest if they don't have enough bees to cover it. So they will slow the queen down and slow down the expansion of your hive. From my experience, if you have that ventilation open at the bottom of the frames, if you'll ever notice, sometimes you'll get this pattern instead of all 4 corners of your hive filled with brood during that booming period of the spring when that queen's wanting to really ramp up. So that's why I don't. I do see a benefit to them. Growing up in the South, we used them on about 1,000 hives one year to see if it would help during the July, August dog days of summer ventilation period. It did help probably with bees dealing with the heat, especially down there. And yes, you do get a little bit of help with mite drop. So what I tell people is they have their place, I think, during the summer, into the fall, and even during the winter for ventilation purposes. But I tell people to close them up in the spring. When those hives are starting to boom and grow, I've seen it, your hive will grow faster, your brood nest will expand faster if you close it up. And then when that is established and the weather's more conducive for them, then take them out. Another issue is don't ever install a new package or even a new nuke, but especially a new package on a hive with a screen bottom board. Why? They don't have any reason to stay there other than you putting them in there with the queen. If they don't have brood to cluster on and regulate, then they're going to cluster. And time again, we'll have people that'll put a package in and they'll call and say, hey, my bees flew out of the hive, they're up in a tree. First question I ask them, did you put them on a screen bottom board that was open? 90% of the time it's yes. So I've just seen that too many times with the number of packages that we deal with. So I would say if you got them and you're going to use them, keep them closed when you install your packages until they get that brood nest established. Then you can take the insert out and leave them open. That's my take on it.
Do you paint a solid bottom board on the inside?
No.
Okay, so
No, the
outside
funny thing
edges.
is, though, the
outside-
manufacturers do.
Right.
Man Lake.
Yeah.
I'm a Man Lake distributor. They paint the inside of the bottom. It's just easier on their paint line. But
Yeah.
when I build them personally, I paint everything external but not the internal. Any other? Okay, next question.
Do you maintain nukes for sustainability of your operations? And if so, what ratio of production colonies to nukes do you carry?
Do you maintain nucleus colonies for the sustainability of your operation? And if so, what percentage do you carry next to your production house? Is that right?
I don't. I might be in California, but when I was wintering here, I did maintain some. When they come back, I just, I do keep some extra hives. If I want production of 150 hives, I run 200 hives. That's how I